People who have uncovered a secret passage, tunnel, or room in your house, what's the creepiest thing you found inside? When I was in high school, my dad purchased this old Victorian that he intended to flip. Before he got around to working on it, he'd let me hang out there with friends. It seemed pretty cool until the first and only night we decided to spend the night. We set up an old TV DVD player and basically made the whole empty living room a big lounge/sleeping area with beanbags and blankets. It was getting pretty late when we started to hear noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like scratching and rustling, nothing too freaky, probably mice or something. Well, anyways, one of the guys that was over decided we should go investigate. We head up the stairs and used our phones for light as none of the fixtures upstairs had light bulbs. We walked through the hall, getting closer and closer to the noise. We get to the huge built-in bookshelf at the end of the hall, and the noise somehow seems to be coming from behind it. My friend starts knocking on the wall around it to see if it stirs up any more noise. We're still assuming some kind of animal or something. He starts monkeying with the shelf, and he manages to pull the entire thing towards us, and it ends up being a frigging door to a hidden room? Of course we were giddy because this is some shit you only read about or see in movies. We shine our phones into the room, and it's straight out of a horror film. Filth everywhere, super old-looking kids' toys, spiderwebs up the yin-yang, and the creepiest part of all, super deep scratches on the back of the bookshelf from fingernails. You could even see the dirty handprints that went along with them. It was the thing of nightmares, and we got the hell out of there quickly. Definitely one of the scariest things I've ever seen. Story 2. I was working at a 100-plus-year-old abandoned farmhouse several years ago. My coworker and I were told to find the well for the house, since they were thinking about developing the property. After looking for a while, we figured it might be in the old house. I grabbed my flashlight and we headed in through a window that wasn't boarded up very well. The place was creepy. The second floor had a burnt goat carcass and pentagrams drawn in ash all over the walls. That's when the chills and goosebumps started. We eventually made it to the basement, where I almost fell into the very deep well at the end of the steps. I'm not sure how deep it was, but our 25-foot tape wouldn't hit the bottom. My curiosity was still running wild, so we went searching around the basement. My coworker noticed that one of the stone walls didn't go up to the floor joist and pointed out that it was probably a fake wall. Good call on his part. He boosted me over the wall, and I helped him climb over. The first room was empty and nothing exciting, just dark, wet, and cold. Looking around, there was another wall with an opening. I decided to go first again and was boosted over the wall. My coworker thought it would be funny to hang onto my flashlight for a while I stumbled in the dark. Finally, he tossed it over to me, and that's when I began freaking out. The room had chains built into the walls with wrist and ankle shackles. The walls had scratch marks, probably from someone trying to escape. I lasted about 30 seconds in the room before I started my dash over both walls, past the well, and right out the window we had climbed through to get in. I don't think it was just the shackles or the scratch marks that creeped me out, but the ice-cold chills that shot down my spine, like there was something truly evil lurking in that place. Story 3. My high school used to have a hole in the side of a staircase. It looped around, and the drywall leading to the underside appeared to be smashed. There were a bunch of music stands and various other items blocking it, so I could not get to it. I never really bothered because I assumed it was just a hole in the drywall. One day, between school and drumline rehearsal, a few friends and I played hide and seek in the school. I was looking for them, and I just knew one of them was under those stairs. I moved all the stands and crawled into the little hole in the wall. It was really dark, so I turned on my flashlight and shined it around. None of my friends were in there, but I realized it had been used as a place of worship for some interesting group of people in our school. There was a pentagram on the floor, handprints, and messages on the wall that I hope were done in dark red paint. I remember one said, "Death is release," but I cannot recall the other. Also, in the same paint, there was a picture that looked like some kind of demon. I immediately got my friends and showed them, and they were just as freaked out. We never talked about it again. Before I could show anyone else, the school had fixed the drywall. I assume a janitor finally walked into the music wing and noticed the hole in the wall. I have videos and pictures of this somewhere if anyone wants proof, because I know this sounds unbelievably wicked, Message me if you are skeptical. Story 4. When I was in 6th grade, I went to an apartment complex with 2 friends, and it was crazy. The whole complex was pretty much normal, but the place we went to belonged to a friend of my friend's mom. I think he owned it or something. It was super big, probably the size of 5 or more apartments. I remember the layout was weird. You entered and walked straight into the kitchen, and to the right was a hallway. The kitchen had a teacup-sized dining area. Down the hallway, I don't really remember what was there. Probably his room or something. At the end, though, there were stairs leading to the bottom floor. Down there, you opened an airplane door, and it was literally the inside of a plane. There was a projector inside, and we got to watch a movie. Next, another door in the plane led to a huge area. It was like a big downstairs with an upper floor with railings and a large cutout to the floor below. On the bottom floor, there was a room with a surgery table set up like a scene from the Twilight Zone. Then you went up the stairs to a kitchen with a hidden room in the closet. The hidden room led to a giant stage with only upper seating, no bottom seats. There were stairs to get down, and the seats led to another area with a small hidden doorway on a railing. This must sound super confusing, but that house was insane. Story 5. I went to a high school that was built years ago, maybe like 200 or 300 years ago. My friend and I noticed these hatches that were about 6 feet off the floor next to all the toilets. For context, the school was based around a quad, so there was a toilet down some stairs at each corner of the quad. Obviously, we had to check these hatches out, so we did during a drama lesson that we snuck out of. We got in there and there was a corridor under the actual corridor, which was only about 4 or 5 feet tall, so we had to crawl through. The corridors connected all the toilets, and there were vents at the top of the walls that were at skirting board level in the classrooms, so we could watch lessons going on, which was cool. There were tons of pipes and electrical wires and other non-interesting stuff that you would expect, apart from in one corner of the quad. The hatch for this one was locked from the inside, it looked, and the pipes had all gone back into the wall or stopped, so all the walls were bare concrete slabs rather than bricks, which was odd. There was a small gap at the bottom of the wall that I could only just fit through. It was a struggle crawling under as we only had our mobiles for torches, and I am not the smallest of people. When we got through it, it felt so much colder in this opening than it did in the corridor. The space was also much more spacious as we could stand up, and also the lights from our torches didn't light up the opposite side of the room when we shone them, which almost made it seem like our torches weren't even on. The room also smelt really bad, and we saw what looked like a decomposed cat, which was now mostly just bones and some fur, at the side next to the wall closest to us. More freakily, there was this weird stone arch above the cat, and there was some red writing that wasn't blood but was pretty creepy. It was a few years ago, but I vaguely remember it saying something along the lines of, "If you are found here, the school will expel you, but Lucifer shall do much worse." There were a few scratches on the wall and some symbols that we thought were letters but couldn't make them out. We took some pictures and got the heck out of there really quickly because we were crapping bricks at this point. It was a fairly prestigious school, so expulsion was probably the scariest thing that could happen to us at that point. This was about 4 years ago, and the pictures were on an old phone, so I don't really think I could get them, although I would like to see them myself now. Story 6. In our first-year dorm at school, there was a panel that looked a little different from the other panels on a mahogany wall. The other panels were clearly part of the overall wooden wall, but this particular panel looked as if it had been tacked on with a few screws, which were painted with a dark paint to match the mahogany color. The school building was an 18th century mansion, which had been converted into an orphanage during the Spanish flu epidemic, circa 1918, then reconverted into a boarding school in the early 1930s. So we guessed the odd panel was used to cover something as part of one of those conversions. Everyone in the dorm noticed the panel, but we were first-year students, too new to the school, albeit too scared to do anything about it. Cue wild speculations about the odd panel. Ghosts, serial killers, skeletons, and so on. Sometime during our second year, we got talking about the odd panel and decided to investigate. While everyone was out on a cross-country run, 2 friends and I went to the first-year dorm with a toolbox we had stolen from the woodwork room. Undoing those screws wasn't easy. Years' worth of paint, dust, and dirt had built up on them. After an hour, we got all the screws out. We pulled the odd panel off. Behind it was a white sliding door, about 16 inches wide and 14 inches long, with a small Art Deco glass knob set in the brick wall. We slid the door open. There were a lot of ropes on one side where there used to be a wall. Seems as if someone had ripped that side wall out to sort out the ropes or something. We realized then that it was a dumbwaiter. We also immediately realized it offered us an advantage. The 2 floors below ours were strictly off-limits to students. We never knew what was in those rooms, so we thought this was our chance to find out. The smallest friend climbed into the dumbwaiter and left the sliding door open. The other friend and I pulled the ropes to lower it. We were nervous because the ropes felt so dry that they might snap. When the smallest friend spotted the second dumbwaiter door, he tried to push it open, but it was blocked by something behind it. We discussed the pros and cons of lowering him further down to the next floor. We weren't sure whether the ropes could handle his weight if we had to pull him back up. The smallest friend started to get uneasy, as he had no way of getting out of the dumbwaiter box if it got trapped. The other friend shrugged and said, "Forget it, let's lower him some more." We pulled the ropes. The box got stuck when it angled awkwardly on its way down. I climbed through the dumbwaiter door, made my way down the brick hole, and used one foot to stomp on the box to straighten its angle. That's when things got a little messed up. I stomped just right, and the box corrected itself and fell cleanly down the hole, with the smallest friend screaming his head off. The other friend tried to halt the fall by grabbing the ropes, but they burned some skin off his hands. The ropes were whipping against my face while I tried not to slip and fall. We heard a loud crash at the bottom. About 2 minutes of dead silence passed, and then the smallest friend shouted from below, "I'm all right, you useless bastards." I climbed down the hole to rescue him, but the box was intact. We couldn't break it to free him, so he kicked the third dumbwaiter door open and climbed out. Then I heard voices in the mysterious room. It turned out that the third dumbwaiter door was an entry to the housefather's private flat. Oops! While the housefather shouted at the smallest friend in the flat, I shimmied back up to our dorm floor. We were hurriedly screwing the odd panel back to the wall when the housefather walked in with the smallest friend. That little adventure earned us a 2-week suspension and 100 demerit points each. They also removed the dumbwaiter box and ropes, covered the dumbwaiter door with a brick wall, and added more screws to the odd panel. Story 7. When I was in college, the university had an old insane asylum as part of its property. It was mostly abandoned, with a few research labs and facilities scattered around, but otherwise it was largely intact. Super spooky. Apparently, it hasn't been renovated or widely used because of the massive amounts of asbestos, and the remediation costs would run into millions. Anyways, my friends and I were fascinated with it during our freshman and sophomore years and really wanted to find a way in. Because the university is heated via steam, there are lots of service tunnels scattered around campus, including on the asylum property. We would wander around at night, checking them to see if they were unlocked, and occasionally we got into some neat areas. The best one was a tunnel in the asylum area with an unlocked service tunnel that led directly into the facility. Holy crap, it was spooky even though the tunnel led into the basement of the printing services facility. After some other minor trespassing, we also discovered that one of the exterior doors of the hospital wards had a very old rusty lock that was easily jimmied with a pocket knife blade, and we were in. Just go in the door, walk through a basement straight out of a horror movie, climb some terrifying stairs, and you find yourself inside the hospital ward. Words cannot describe how spooky it actually was. Inside the hospital ward, the rooms were still intact, padded rooms and all. It was especially creepy considering the leaky steam heating that made eerie noises and the fact that we couldn't use flashlights because any cop driving by who saw them would come investigate. Walking through this abandoned asylum in the dark, we came upon a single light illuminating an ancient elevator with a table inside, water dripping through the light. A few rooms later, we found a bunch of painted and mutilated Barbie dolls arranged in a formation on a table. Later, we discovered basement cells that were pure nightmare fuel, and attic rooms that were pitch black, windowless, and felt like they were leading straight to a jump scare. Great memories? I would trespass again. 9 out of 10. Story 8. About 18 months ago, my dad purchased a house that was a church in a past life. At some point, the church closed, and the pastor continued living there for several years as he remodeled the church into a house which eventually bankrupted him and ended with the home going into foreclosure. Almost every room in the house on the main floor has an exterior door, and there are a couple different staircases that lead to the basement. Several months after purchasing the house, while going up the stairs from the basement into the attached garage, my dad noticed a weird carpeted shelf off to the side of the stairs. Looking more closely, he realized there was a handle, which when lifted up revealed a hidden door that goes to another small staircase down. Once down the hidden stairs, he realized there was a hidden 8-foot by 10-foot secret room with all concrete/brick walls. The room is nearly soundproof, and you really wouldn't notice it unless you were looking very closely. He jokes that he is going to use it as a storage space for all of his food, water, and weapons for the apocalypse. Makes me wonder what the church used the room for, though. Story 9. My freshman year at my university, I got stupid drunk, 2013, and decided to go into this cafeteria that had been closed for a year at that point. It had just a thin metal gate preventing anyone from entering, so I pulled on it a little and it snapped, allowing entrance. It was cool being in this cafeteria that nobody had been in it, but it got better. I found how to get into the basement. This basement led to a corridor that I later found out is 1.5 miles of underground tunnels. I did some exploring, but a lot of it was flooded and smelled of decay and rot. Found some Coke bottles from the 1950s. After I did some research on the history, I found out I stumbled into the condemned tunnels of the university that was used to transport things between buildings. A hurricane had rolled through in the 80s and flooded a portion of the tunnels and damaged it. The university decided it was easier to just not use them than to repair them. Cool thinking I was one of people to step foot in there within the past 30-ish years. Story 10. I went to a military school in New Mexico that had been around for a really long time. The place looks like an old fort. Anyway, senior year we were messing around in the Sally Port, wrestling, shoving, whatever, just being idiots. One of us slams into a green door and it popped open. In the 4 years I had been there, I had never really thought about those doors, nor had I seen anyone use them. The door opened to a spiral metal staircase that went down into the darkness. Cobwebs abound. Long story short, it was a creepy, musty old storage area. I don't remember if the catacombs went the whole perimeter of the barracks or what, but I know we explored pretty fully, found some old furniture, some clothing/bedding, and some other dated items, most likely just things various cadets had left behind in their room. I think I took an expired fire extinguisher that was in some forgotten corner of the area. Story 11. I used to live in downtown Greenville, TX in the 1990s. Greenville used to be a thriving cotton town in the 1950s, but the population has declined and downtown is mostly abandoned. My friends and I used to explore the abandoned buildings for fun before urban exploring became a thing. Anyway, there was a multi-story building that used to have a Mexican restaurant downstairs in the 1970s, but it had been abandoned since then. The bottom of that building was locked up tight, but we were able to gain access to the roof from a neighboring building and finally got inside that building that way. Inside were some old offices. Nothing much of interest there, but then I noticed a crack in the wall behind some peeling wallpaper. There was a door-sized sliding panel that had been papered over decades before. Behind it was an apartment that would have been used as housing by the people who owned the business downstairs, and it was largely untouched. I found newspapers from the 1940s, and the last one was dated 1947. Story 12. As a teenager, I lived in an old apartment building across the street from a bar. I was hanging out with friends in the basement, and since no one ever went down there, we decided to explore it. The basement was made up of 4 rooms. One of them was off to the side at the front of the building and was fairly small. Inside, we found old liquor bottles and a jar of ravioli from the 1930s. At the far end of the room, there was a pile of boards stacked against the wall. For some reason, we moved them and found a hole just big enough for a person to crawl through. Being curious, we grabbed flashlights and crawled into the tunnel. It was dark, damp, and filled with insects. We could hear cars passing overhead and realized we were underneath the road. The tunnel was about 150 feet long. When we reached the end, there was another board, but this one seemed to be nailed in place. There was no way we could turn around, so we kicked at it until it broke enough for us to get through. The three of us crawled out and found ourselves in a dark room. We searched for a light switch, but there wasn't one, so we looked around with our flashlights. We realized we were in another basement, but there was no door. Then we noticed a small wooden door in the ceiling. We climbed out and found ourselves in what appeared to be another basement. We went upstairs and discovered we were inside the bar across the street from my apartment. The bartender, who was also the owner, came over yelling at us. She questioned us, and we explained our adventure. It turned out the tunnel was a secret passage used during Prohibition. The bar had originally been a speakeasy. Story 13. My old high school was built in the 1800s. It is a very beautiful building that is 4 stories tall. There are lots of stairs throughout the building, and near one corner of the building are stairs that no one ever uses, very far from all classrooms. During my senior year, my buddy and I were wasting time just wandering the hallways, and we got to these seldom used stairs. We were on the bottom floor and noticed there were stairs leading down to another level below. We followed those stairs and noticed they led to a door which was cracked open. We went inside the door, and it led to a large room filled with cubicles and dozens of employees on computers. The weird thing was, none of these employees were school staff. We were seniors. We'd seen everyone for 4 years. We were confused, and we left. We tried to return a few times later, but the door leading to the room was always locked. This was in 2006, and I still wonder who the hell all those people were. Story 14. There was some construction being done for a new building at my university. One day my buddy and I met some nice girls at a bar, and as the evening got late, they asked to smoke a joint with us. For whatever reason, we decided that the construction site for the new building was a great location for this, and we got to it. 15 minutes in, my buddy let me know that there were cops watching us and it was time to dip. We started to casually walk away when the girls decided to book it immediately, drawing sirens. My friend tapped me on the shoulder and reminded me that chivalry is dead, those girls are on their own, and he had a spot to hide. He took me to a half-constructed elevator shaft for the new building, and we climbed all the way down to the bottom where we found a massive underground network of tunnels. When I say massive, I mean multiple channels, each of which was multiple kilometers long. At this point, we were pretty drunk and high and decided to see how far this thing goes. Every 500 meters or so, there would be a wooden barrier, but a few quick flying body checks made short work of them, and we continued on our way. Eventually, we found a ladder and hatch and decided we had come too far not to see what was up. So, we climbed through and found ourselves in a locked room in the middle of our university library, about 1 kilometer and a bit from where we started. A janitor walked in and caught us clearly doing something we weren't supposed to, but I pulled my best Seymour Skinner impression and said we were just trying to find out how to get out of there. Thankfully, he bought it, or was too confused as to how we got into that locked room in the first place, and decided to let us leave without further questions. We didn't find anything too exciting in the tunnels, a few empty beer bottles from decades back, and some white power graffiti, and that's about it. But I made it home without a possession and/or a trespassing charge, so I'll call it a win. Story 15. When I was a senior in high school, I was sitting on my back porch with a friend, drinking and smoking cigarettes, when she suddenly got quiet. After a moment, she turned to me and asked, "Where does that window go?" I'd lived in this house for 5 years at this point and had never noticed the extra window on the back of the house. Amazingly, neither had anyone else in my family. The backyard was pretty overgrown, and we almost never spent any time there. I pretty quickly determined that the window had to be located behind the wall of our hall bathroom shower, but it was locked from the inside and seemed to be nailed shut as well. What could possibly be hidden inside that wall? Why would you seal up a window from the inside but leave it completely accessible from the back of the house? It didn't make any sense. This naturally became a topic of intense speculation for me and the friends I had over to drink every time Mom went out of town. There must be a body, or a cache of old documents, or pirate gold back there, but alas, we couldn't get inside without breaking the window, and I wasn't willing to vandalize my own house to satisfy my curiosity. 10 years later, the house was in serious need of renovations, including a complete remodel of the hall bathroom, and I finally got my chance. Time had done nothing but sharpen my curiosity about the mysterious, sealed window, and as I knocked down the tiles and broke through the drywall, 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind. Jimmy Hoffa could be hidden back there, or an original copy of the Declaration of Independence, or quite possibly the Holy Grail itself. Barely able to contain my excitement, I ripped down a huge chunk of the wall with nothing but my gloved hands, finally revealing the long-forgotten window and a bunch of moldy pink insulation. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, kids. Story 16. Many years ago, my now ex-husband and I purchased what used to be an old farmhouse. It was a unique old house that had been added onto many times over the years. We started updating it room by room and had been living there about a year before we began to work on the finished basement. I had 3 boys from my previous marriage who were 9, 11, and 14 that lived with us but visited their dad every weekend, who lived about a mile away. The first project in the basement we planned on doing was to convert one of the good-sized storage rooms into a walk-in closet for seasonal clothing, sports equipment, etc. The previous owners had left several cheap metal shelving units behind in this room that we'd never moved but weren't part of the new design. The night before I was set to start on the project, the boys and I had rented videos and watched Stir of Echoes with Kevin Bacon. From what I remember, the movie was about the dad character, Kevin Bacon, having dreams or visions about a young girl who had died and was trying to get him to find her and solve her murder. It wasn't too intense but had a few suspenseful parts with jump scares and special effects. I recall the end being something about him digging in the basement trying to find the dead girl, breaking through a block wall and discovering her behind some thick plastic sheeting or something like that. Predictable, but we all enjoyed it, especially my 11-year-old who loved scary movies. The next morning, the boys all went to their dads, my new husband went to work, and I started on the storage room project. The walls in this room were covered in thin paneling. I began moving the metal shelving out so I could start work when I noticed that the paneling on one of the walls behind the shelving wasn't snug against the wall like all the rest. It was kind of gapping a bit at the bottom. I took a closer look and saw a very small slide lock, like a miniature deadbolt cut into the paneling and a distinct cutout like a door. What the hell? We have a secret room. How cool! I couldn't keep this discovery all to myself, so I ran upstairs to call the boys at their dad's. Eric, the 11-year-old, answered the phone, and I told him what I found in the basement. Both of his brothers were at friends' houses, but he was super excited to check it out with me and jumped on his bike, zooming home all sweaty from pedaling so fast. This was exactly the kind of thing Eric loved. We went back into the basement. I slid the lock and pried the door open with a screwdriver. The first thing we saw was a thick sheet of plastic, just like in the movie we'd watched the night before. Holy crap! We slammed it shut and started laughing. He said we had to be brave, so I found a razor knife and sliced through the plastic. Inside was a small room with a sandy dirt floor that had several old TV sets, buckets of old glass tubes, and an old desk with old newspapers in it. No dead body or Kevin Bacon to be found, but we sure had fun going through the desk and laughing about the secret room, which was called the Stir of Echoes room from that point on. My father-in-law said that it was an old-fashioned root cellar that was used to store root vegetables like potatoes back in the day. What a strange coincidence that we had watched that stupid movie the night before. Story 17. My friend worked in Mary King's Close in Edinburgh, which is a place that offers guided tours of the underground city. When the population of Edinburgh began to grow hundreds of years ago, they built on top of the old city, and this old city is now miles and miles of tunnels and buildings right underneath the Edinburgh we know today. Anyway, most of the old city has been blocked off for safety reasons, but Mary King's Close has a couple of streets you can wander down to get a feel for life back in the 1600s. For a while, the Close has been trying to unblock bricked-off streets to create a larger area of the old city for people to explore, but with little luck, possible cave-ins and dead ends, Also, probably unsafe areas, I'm not entirely sure. That is, until my friend told me that they discovered what they originally thought was just an old boarded-up wall at the back of one of the caverns, which actually turned out to be some sort of massive wooden door. I recall her saying they found the remnants of hinges on one side and a small keyhole on the other. This was a few years ago that my friend was telling me all this, so I'm not sure if they have managed to do anything about it yet. I hope they have. This sort of thing seems so cool to me. There must be so many streets that haven't been wandered in hundreds of years, and I want to know what amazing things are down there. Story 18. When I was in grade school, my friend and I had to come in one Saturday to do some cleaning as a punishment for something we did. They had us go to the church associated with the school and help out there. The priest led us to a room full of boxes and told us to help organize things. I guess it was all stuff people had donated, and we were tasked with separating books from clothing and so on. Anyway, there had always been a rumor that there was a secret bowling alley in the basement of the church, and my friend and I were definitely going to take this opportunity to find out. After watching us for about 10 minutes, the priest left us alone and said he would come back later to check on us. We waited a few minutes and then decided to try to find the basement. This church was huge, so it wasn't easy, but it was fun. It felt like being in some heist movie. After about 20 minutes or so, we finally found it. We walked into a giant room with tables and chairs stacked everywhere. The only light we had was the poor flash from my friend's flip phone. We eventually found a working light and realized where we were. We had found the bowling alley. It was only a couple of lanes and looked in pretty bad shape. It probably hadn't been used for decades, and now they just used the space to store tables and chairs. It was cool to discover that the rumor was true, but at the same time, it was disappointing. I looked it up years later and found that the church had closed because of deterioration in 1988 and was reopened in 1992. I guess they didn't feel it was worth fixing up the bowling alley, so now it's just a giant storage room. Story 19. I work in real estate and was visiting a large block of land that a developer was planning to develop 40 townhomes on. We're walking around chatting about what will go where, etc., and I ask him if he's demolishing the house on the front corner of the lot. He then gets super excited and takes us up to visit it. We walk in, and the first thing we see is shaggy yellow carpet, not only in every room of the house, but also on the walls and the ceiling. We walk around the kitchen with a bar and pool table in the center of it, and then see an old 1960s-looking fridge in the dining room. Didn't think anything of it, considering how weird the place already was, but the developer opened the fridge door, and it was a secret staircase going down to an underground basement. The basement had the craziest sound system and disco balls and a friggin' stage. There was a canvas painting down there too, and the developer took it off the wall, and there was an escape tunnel out to the back of the block. Apparently, the past owner was a successful lawyer back in the 1970s who took on a lot of drug cases. Story 20. A while back, a friend of mine moved into a new house by the docks. The very first time I was walking up to the side door, I noticed a small, old-looking door on the side wall of the raised porch. I inquired, and all they could tell me was that they called it the SA dungeon and that they had never been in there. I think there was some creepy story to go with it, involving a little child. I told the guys we needed to find out what was inside, but soon forgot after looking around the house. The next time I went over, I again insisted that we needed to make our way into that room and find whatever goodies it had in store for us. An hour or two later, we ended up in front of the door, having a smoke, and it seemed like it was time to bust in. We found some tools to break the old rusted lock and got to it. 10 or so minutes later, the lock was off, and we were peering into a dark, low-roofed room, not being able to see more than 2 feet in front of us. Someone saw a light switch and flicked it on, revealing a small room that looked like it hadn't been touched in many years. A big wooden barrel or vat lay to the left, the kind they make whiskey in. On the right was a small metal can with coiled copper tubing through it, a huge mixing rod of some sort, and some weird-looking pillboxes. As soon as I saw the coiled copper pipe, I realized what we had stumbled upon, a moonshine dungeon. The whole room looked as though it had been dug out by hand, with concrete pavers laid dodgily on the floor. In front of us was another opening in the back wall that led to a room with a wire bed frame on one side and stacked to the roof with large old bottles on the other. We were pretty excited at this point, to say the least. We started poking around, as you do, and found some old Playboy magazines and other weird bits and bobs. I was inspecting the barrel that lay on its side when I knocked out one of the chocks that kept it from rolling around. I went to pick it up from behind the tile where it landed. I saw a plastic bag or something of the sort poking up from under the sand, so, as you do on a treasure hunt of sorts, I started to pull. Now this is where things get really interesting. I got the bag up and found that there was another bag inside, and another, and another. This went on for about 40 or 50 bags before we reached a completely see-through bag that had some weird black-looking thing inside. At first we thought it might be drugs or something, but after peeling back the plastic, a wallet was revealed. Now we were really getting excited, as this treasure hunt might actually pay off. We walked outside into the light to see what might be inside, and bam, a wad of $100 notes thicker than I had seen in a while, adding up to around $17,000. That was a day I will never forget. Story 21. I live in Ciudad Vita, a lovely town constructed during Perón's presidencies in Argentina nearly 50 to 60 years ago. The town's purpose was to give homes to army soldiers and police officers who were looking for a place to build a family. It's located in the west of the Buenos Aires metropolitan area. Because of its purpose, the town is also kind of a stronghold, with barracks on one side, some water towers with sniper-like positions, and forest on the other side. One day, while making my bed and tidying my room, I fell and heard a metallic sound under the floor, specifically in the wooden floor of the wardrobe. I called my parents, and with the help of my father, we discovered a tunnel behind our house that has exits all around my neighborhood. Sadly, the police made us cover it with cement, so it's closed until something happens. Story 22. My parents' house had two, well, sort of. There was an old basement that was structurally unsound, so my brother and I were forbidden from going down there. I only saw it once. It was dark and damp. Sorry, that's all I remember. I was very young. When I was 6, my parents had it filled in and repaired, so all that remained was the cupboard under the stairs and a concrete slab. The upstairs attic was also our playroom, and a really cool playroom because it was nearly the size of the entire house, a huge area. There were holes in the walls you could crawl through and end up in the void between our house and the neighbor's house. Nothing there but cobwebs and dust. After we moved out, the new owners converted it into a master bedroom. It doesn't really count, but in the garden there was an old, disused well that had been covered with a metal lid. You could pry it open and peer down inside. Of course we weren't supposed to, but we did all the same and somehow never became the next baby Jessica. They had it secured and filled in properly shortly before we moved. Story 23. When I was a freshman in university, the dorm I was in had laundry facilities in the basement. As I was lugging my clothes down the basement hall, I noticed a hatch in the tile floor that made a hollow and reverberating thud when stepped on. Being a clueless freshman, I tried to open it. No luck. The hatch was heavy and crusted over with disuse. I went upstairs, got a strong friend, and we lifted it together. Beneath it was near-pitch darkness, but we just entered the age of flashlight apps for phones that didn't have their own, so we lit it up and saw what looked like a dank, not that kind of dank, concrete shaft covered in cobwebs, dust, and weirdly wet everywhere. It extended under the floor in one direction, with a drop-off in about 15 feet. So, we gathered a few more brave souls, set my roommate as a lookout for staff, and in case the hatch slammed shut on us, and dropped in. We were surrounded by plumbing, and it smelled like it. We crawled forward and found that the drop-off was only a few feet with a plastic chair at the base, presumably to help land and get back up. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. After we dropped down, the ceiling stayed the same height, so we could walk properly. It was a long walk that ended in a metal door. Opening it, we found ourselves in what seemed to be the housekeeping storage. Several expansive rooms of supplies, from toiletries to road salt, and all sorts of cleaning, plumbing, and electrical equipment, On the other side of the storage rooms, we opened another door and came out in the basement on the far side of the building. All told, no monsters, no chase scenes, just dust and toiletries, which we stole a few of, in case the dorm bathroom ever ran low, which it did. It made for an exciting Nerf war when we snuck up on our enemies from behind since they expected us from our own side. Story 24. My grandmother married an old money lawyer about 20 years ago. I visited the house he had lived in alone for ages. This house had been in his family for many generations. While exploring, I discovered a hidden door in his upstairs law office. You basically had to crawl to fit into it, and it took you about 30 feet to reach a hidden door behind a plant, which opened just over a staircase. I found out later that he had some unsavory characters as clients over the years, and the escape route was so he could get to the lower level of the house and run out the front door if he had to. On the same trip, while using the bathroom, I noticed an original 13-star U.S. flag nailed to a bathroom door in the basement. Literally, an original, threadbare flag in a damp bathroom that probably only got used once or twice a year. I mentioned to him that he should probably find a better home for it, and he was genuinely surprised, not realizing original flags are kind of a big deal. A year later, I heard they had it professionally framed and gave it to a museum, so there's that. In the same basement, there was also a land grant lying on a table, personally signed by either Grover Cleveland or one of the other presidents from that era. Old money types are seriously weird. Story 25. My friend and I found these tunnels at our boarding school. They were basically crawl spaces, but every once in a while they would open up into bigger spaces where you could get comfortable. There was writing in one of these larger spaces indicating that other students from the past had found the tunnels as well, but only about every 10 years or so. There was a note from someone who had snuck out of school to attend a Grateful Dead show in the 1970s, and others from the 50s and 60s. We discovered the tunnels in 2006. They ran all over the school, which was a great way to sneak around. My boarding school had strict rules about guys visiting girls' dorms and vice versa. The best part of all was a tunnel we found that led directly into the school's dining hall. We would often take whole cakes or bagels and cream cheese, anything really, back to our dorms, and our friends never had any idea how we did it. I took photos at the time, but sadly I lost them all. Story 26. I go to a university in Ontario, Canada that was built in the 1960s. The whole campus has a series of steam tunnels and old pedestrian tunnels that were used when the school opened so people could get around campus indoors. At some point, the tunnels were closed, but over the years, people kept finding ways in to explore, party, graffiti, smoke their reefer cigarettes, and so on. One of the older frosh bosses for the art students used to take first years he deemed worthy on little excursions through the old tunnels. He knew them well, and by the end, the frosh were always so disoriented by the maze of steam tunnels and back stairwells that he would finally take them to a door, open it, and they would find themselves on the roof of one of the tallest buildings on campus. This is the same university where they found a tunnel dug in a forested area on campus, complete with submersible pumps, a generator, and lights. A lot of friends knew the guys who dug it, and it was just a bunch of engineering students. The police and media were worried it was tied to a terrorist plot during the Pan Am Games held that year, but it was just used by students to smoke weed and hang out, primarily just because they could. Story 27. So as an easy way to make side money to fuel my Warhammer hobby, flip furniture, items, and etc. on swap shops. The above is relevant because due to the prominence of shabby chic and nostalgia, older furniture is super popular and easy to flip. Cool thing about old school furniture is that sometimes they have secret or hidden compartments, which I always try to find. I have found a few so far, and the most interesting one was a small compartment inside of a secretary with a series of black and white photographs, dated from the 40s to as late as 57, of random places around town and people who were mostly African American. I tried to locate the original owner or descendants to return the photographs, but the trail went cold after the second owner back had gotten the secretary from a pawn shop in the 80s, and the former owner of the pawn shop didn't remember who had sold it to him. Long story short, I donated the photographs to a local museum. They display them as the sights of my town. It was really cool looking at evidence of how things had changed over the years, the old cars and fashion. It was quite interesting. Story 28. In high school, my group of band friends helped clean out and organize the closets and small rooms that held the school's loaner instruments. There were massive amounts of dust, totally destroyed instruments, mold, a lot of dried spit, and dry-rotted cases. It was pretty gross. But, allowed to explore freely for the first time, we found a small door on one of the walls that looked like an air vent, though it wasn't connected to anything as far as we could see. Two guys went down the tunnel and were gone for nearly half an hour. They returned with pictures of a large, mostly empty room, cobwebs in their hair, a soda can, and a crumbling marching band shoe. We compared it to old pictures of uniforms hanging in the band room, and the last time that color shoe had been used was 1981. So I wrote a note with the date, our names, and contact information. We put a new Fanta can down there and a current band shoe, like some kind of time capsule. Then we just sort of forgot about it, and over time it became less funny to talk about. We had asked around, and someone's grandma, who also went to the school when it was built in the 1950s, said the band room used to be the bomb shelter, but it had been converted to the band room once a larger community shelter was built. A few years after we graduated, they demolished the band room to build a new one, and we never heard whether anyone found our note. It had only been down there for maybe 5 years total. Story 29. I used to work for the local phone company. There was an old mental hospital in my town with about 30 buildings, but most were closed and abandoned. Only 3 or 4 were still being used. The main phone lines for the whole complex came into one of the abandoned buildings, so we were allowed in there to do work. What we found was that all of the buildings were connected to each other through a series of underground tunnels. We would each do a little exploring, but it was easy to get lost, so I never went too far. One of my coworkers decided to see as much as he could. The tunnels had no lights. Deep in one of them, he suddenly found a guy standing in the dark, crying. He freaked out and started to slowly back up, then heard people calling out a name. He realized that one of the patients had wandered off and gotten lost. The guy was actually more scared of my coworker than the other way around. He yelled out, and the staff came and got the patient, warning my coworker not to wander in the tunnels again. Story 30. More of a forgotten room than anything. I was working for a hospital that had expanded with an extra building, and part of the basement in the original building had simply stopped being useful for anything. I got sent down there one day to check out a particular room and see if it had enough power sockets to make it useful for a backup crisis management office. I don't think anyone had been in there since the 1970s. There was textured wallpaper and thick carpet, 2 things you're not likely to find anywhere in a modern hospital. In the corner, there was something that looked like a very old computer, with add-on boards made of components fixed to balsa wood and soldered directly to the motherboard. It was labeled fire control and still powered on, so I didn't touch it. Past that room was a tunnel that was secret to the public. Across the road from the hospital was a medical school, and that tunnel made it possible for them to store their cadavers in the hospital morgue. The tunnel had hot and cold water pipes and gas lines running along the ceiling, so it felt like a sauna in there. Story 31. I live in a converted carriage house that was built by a wealthy inventor in the late 1890s. I'm not too sure about the entire history of the building, though I know it was used as doctors' offices and for other purposes over the years. About a month ago, my boyfriend moved into the building and set up his belongings in one of the 5 bedrooms. We were having some electrical problems in that room. A majority of the outlets didn't work, so we decided to go into the basement to try to reset the switches. My sister and I went down there. We found the boiler and electrical room, but there were no labels on the switches, and we didn't want to risk resetting or turning off the whole building's power. However, we noticed an open door at the end of the hallway and decided to check it out. We ended up finding a men's public bathroom, complete with a urinal and a public water fountain outside the room, that looked like it hadn't been used for at least 20 years. Story 32. When I was in college in the late 1990s, I lived in an old house with some friends. One of them had an illegal cat. No pets were allowed. When the landlord would stop by, we would put the cat in one of those attic spaces that opened from the ceiling. One afternoon, we went exploring up there and were surprised to find a real attic with hardwood floors, an old bed, and a clothes rack with a few items of clothing on it. We also found some belongings that clearly had belonged to a family who lived there before it became student housing, including a young girl's diary from the 1940s. She went to the elementary school that was through our backyard. I think her name was Victoria or Vivian, something like that. She kept the diary in a pre-printed calendar-style booklet, so it was convincingly authentic. I kept the diary, imagining I might try to find her or her children, but it was not easy. I realized she probably got married and would have a new last name. This was in a pre-Facebook world. I still have the diary. It is somewhere in our basement. I will try to find it tomorrow and perhaps attempt again. Edit. Here are a few pages from it. I was slightly off on the year. It was 1946. I am not sure how I thought I knew her name. Maybe it was in one of the other books in the attic, or it is somewhere in this diary and I just have not found it yet. She lists most of her classmates and some of her teachers, so there are many names to go off, though possibly not hers. She has marked July 13th as her birthday. This would have been in Madison, Wisconsin. On August 6th, she references going to their house on Mill Street. The house on Mill Street is where I found this. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.